Good afternoon, it's Patriot Smoothie here at the Ottawa Courthouse. It was an interesting day 18 so far. We continued the testimony this morning with Crown Witness Paul Jorgenson. He testified about several interesting things. We also had an interesting event happen here at the courthouse itself. I'll get to that. By the way, if you didn't know, my name's John. You can call me John. So we started off, Mr. Jorgenson described, the Crown started by saying they had no further questions for Mr. Jorgenson, so the examination in chief concluded. Then Mr. Granger, Eric Granger, for Tamara Lich rose to do the cross-examination. Mr. Granger had several interesting questions for the witness. They talked about an incident of violence that he described, Mr. Jorgenson described being encircled on a sidewalk, I believe east of Kent, 50 meters if I recall. And so he described that he and his partner were walking east on this sidewalk. We talked about this a bit yesterday. He does not remember if they were side by side, abreast, or in file. One of the things to note before I go on is this witness is very descriptive in the answers they give. So there's quite a lot of verbiage and quite a lot of advanced vocabulary even. There's a very interesting vocabulary choices in the way that they describe things. So some of that's included in the synopsis that I've done on my Twitter account. So if you want to follow along, but in some cases due to necessity I have to shorten it. But we get the gist of what's said. So he was walking east, his partner either abreast or in line, and they came across a group of 5 or 6 protesters walking westward. They came about each other. They came face to face, I assume, and he described being encircled either on 2 or 3 sides. Now, in cross-examination, he admitted that he had at least 1 or 2 sides open, so there's a minimum of 1 side that was open. He said that he testified that he had experiences as a child being bullied. His hair was pulled. He was kicked with a steel-toe boot. His mother had to relocate him from his school. So a lot of experience, with bullying, and so he said he didn't need to hear very much from this group of people to know that there was a situation that he needed to get out of. So he testified that as they were coming towards him, they said something along the lines of "You're wearing a mask." Every single noise. You're wearing a mask, and so he pushed against them. He said he pushed against them, and he eventually pushed through one of the people. He called them a bully. They're bullies. He pushed through one of the bullies. So they said, "Are you wearing a mask?" or "You're wearing a mask." He felt intimidated and threatened by that language, and then proceeded with his partner to very quickly get out of there and push through one of the bullies. He described them as a gaggle of something, and he also testified, because Granger asked about his statements at something called the People's Commission. This is a non-governmental organization. Chris Dacey actually went to one of these meetings where this witness actually spoke at the People's Commission, not associated with the government in any way, not an official organization. It was basically a venue for aggrieved citizens to express their experiences during the convoy. And so he testified at that these people were a gaggle, that they encircled him, and so on. And when we get to the brass tacks of this encounter, he more or less said that they could have been fully on the sidewalk or fully on the road, reminiscent of yesterday's food truck argument. So they're either on the road, on the sidewalk, and Granger put it to him, well, if these people were walking 5 or 6, it's possible some of them could have spilled on the road, but he said no, by the time they were with us, they were mostly all on the sidewalk, but still there could have been some on the road. He doesn't really know, but they were threatening, they encircled him, and then he proceeded to push one of them out of the way because they're bullies, and they asked him about his mask, and then get out of there because he had a lot of experiences with bullying as a child. So that's that situation. He was asked later by Eunice if that was the only verbal encounter he had with a protester. There was a large back and forth about his definition of a verbal exchange. He said he never responded to anyone, so he couldn't really describe those as verbal exchanges. Didn't really understand what she was getting at with that question. It was quite a long answer. And he did say that there was other exchanges. There was the horns, people firing fireworks at his balcony, according to his testimony, and he had a fear of combustion. We briefly mentioned this yesterday. So that was going on. So those he considers encounters as well. There was also a question from Eunice about his very expensive headset that he bought, the sound canceling headset. He first testified that he got it. He was asked where he bought it. He testified he bought it at Best Buy. Later corrected that to say he doesn't know if it was Best Buy. It couldn't have been Best Buy. Doesn't remember where. Eunice asked him if he kept the receipt. He said he did not keep the receipt, so he can't tell us the cost. And he still has them to this day and still uses those expensive headsets that he testified about last time. Granger, going back to Granger's, because we didn't get very far with Eunice. Most of the morning was spent with Mr. Eric Granger's cross-examination. Going back to that now, jumping back, Granger asked him about the wording he used, because he said something along the lines of he came back on February 9th or thereabouts yesterday in court. So Granger basically asked him, when you say thereabouts, that means you're not sure. And he's like, well, I wasn't sure of the calendar date or if it was what day it was, but yes, I'm sure I came back February 9th. Are you sure you never came back between Ottawa, the date he left, the first Monday, and the February the 9th? And he said, yeah, I didn't come back. But there was an exchange about that unprecise language, I guess you could call it, that was used. This is a theme from the Granger and Greenspun team. We see a lot of questioning about that kind of unspecific language, like I believe or this or that. And if somebody says I believe, Greenspun usually will ask, well, when someone says I believe, that means you don't know, and he'll ask for the specifics. So that was an interesting detail, a look at how some of these smaller details are being explored by the defense team in the court. Again, you can go on my Twitter account for more of the precise details, but an interesting exchange nonetheless. The most interesting part that Mr. Granger asked him about was a demonstration he participated in. He testified that he did, Paul Jorgenson participated in a demonstration where his intention when he left his house was to go to the Billings Bridge, the famous Battle of the Billings Bridge. He didn't use that verbiage, but that's what he's referring to. I believe it was the February 13th counter-protest, the Battle of the Billings Bridge, as some of the local citizens call it, where they went down there and they held that group of 40 or 50 calls for where they held a group of 40 or 50 convoy vehicles at the intersection of Riverside Drive and Bank Street, I believe, at Billings Bridge for many hours, and it was quite the situation. There was a lot of accosting, and so he was intending to go to that, but he ended up at Elgin near the Nature Museum, and his intention, according to him, was not to block traffic, but he ended up doing it anyways. He was blocking traffic, but don't worry, they never blocked any of the local traffic. They only blocked convoy vehicles that had the quote iconography. Thank you, Chris, of the convoy. So I guess that means flags, F. Trudeau, whatever else he associates with the protest movement. So they blocked them for hours. And he said that the police was aggressive with him, that they put on gloves. And he was asked specifically by Mr. Granger if he ever was threatened with arrest, and he said no, but they put on gloves and they tried to guilt trip him, according to his testimony, by telling him that their blocking traffic was taking them away from more important duties, and he said that he was not persuaded by that guilt tripping. So that's an interesting exchange, and he went on for some time describing these interactions at Elgin and near the Nature Museum, right near police headquarters. He even went into detail about how that is near police headquarters, because he was asked how many police were there. He said, well, it could have been 100, could have been a couple squad cars. They came, they went, they tried to intimidate me, they tried to guilt trip me, or that's what he was testifying about. So interesting. And Mr. Granger even asked him, are you aware at the time of that event that was a designated police emergency route during the convoy? And he's like, well, no, the police never communicated with us at all. Chris, what time are we at?
7:42.
So I can add one more detail. So there's that situation. I also want to quickly talk to you about, he was asked about his attempts to contact police, and he said police, he got the impression for them, 3 impressions, I believe, that they can't do anything, that they won't do anything, or that they're not interested. Mr. Granger having him admit that there's 3 separate different things. He testified that those were 3 sentences. So that's the kind of exchanges that we're having. And he also testified that, so Mr. Granger's like, what made you believe that the police were not interested or not going to take action on the things that you reported? And things he reported included vehicles driving around without license plates. And there was an extended exchange between Mr. Granger and Mr. Jorgenson about how he knew they weren't driving around with license plates. He said he didn't see them on the back. There was 3 or 4 vehicles without these license plates. He saw the back plates for all of them, which were missing, and he admits that he didn't see 2 cars with license plates. So there was 2 cars he didn't see the front of. So theoretically, he admitted there could have been license plates up there, and so Granger got him to admit that. Therefore, he cannot blanket conclude that all of the cars had no plates, because he never saw the front of 2 of those such cars. So those are the things he called the non-emergency line about. So Granger inquired, how do you know that they weren't going to take action? What gave you that impression? Did they tell you they didn't care? And he said no, but they more or less said thanks for the information and had him on his way. So that's after that point he felt like they didn't care, or they weren't going to do anything, and that's where he got that conclusion from based on his testimony. That's what I surmised. So that's an interesting exchange he had with Mr. Granger there. That's the kind of morning we've had. Very word heavy, but again, if you want more of the details, go on my Twitter account. From Ottawa, I'm Patriot Smoothie. John, thanks for joining me.